All right, good afternoon, everybody. We have a quorum. I'm just waiting to see if Chris shows up, and then we should have a new appointee that's planning on sitting in on this meeting. He will be seated for the February meeting. So now, if I see one of those two, I'll just go ahead and start. Okay, I guess we'll just, when they come in, they'll be here. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order at 3 o'clock. I just have this thing I need to read here for people who would like to join us by phone. Let's see. Oh, wow. There's a citizen participation guide. I thought this had more into it. But if you are using your phone, to raise your hand when you want to speak, press *9. And to mute and unmute yourself on a phone, you press *6. All right. First roll call here. We got James is here, Jessica Doty's here, Jean's here, Jesse's here, Kip's here, Britt's here. Okay. Has everybody had a chance to look through the minutes yet? And are there any changes that need to be made? Jesse?
I did not agree with the summary of the discussion for the long-range plan. I feel like many of the members expressed their support for the equity plan, and in the minutes of the meeting, when the discussion of the long-range plan is summarized, it seems to sort of give equal weight to each plan, which I don't think was my sense. If I had been summarizing that discussion, I would have said that the majority of the board supported the equity long-range plan, and I feel like in the synopsis that was not represented, and I don't know to fix that if we should have done a roll call, but it was just sort of said like one person supported the second two plans, one person or a couple people supported the equity plan, and the other plan is the best for greenhouse gases and shorter driving times. But I feel like if I were to summarize the discussion, I would say that overwhelmingly the board supported the equity long range transportation plan. And so I don't feel like that summary was, I think it should be edited. Like I don't know if you want to do a roll call right now and have people actually go on record by name, but I feel like instead of having a summary that said that the equity plan was overwhelmingly supported, it was sort of this like all the plans have pros and cons kind of thing. And I don't feel like that was what I remember our discussion being like. So I would love to hear from other people, but I feel like that summary did not mirror to me what the take home from that was.
Okay, Ben, did you want to address that at all?
Yeah, I don't know what the best way to do that is, if a roll call vote is needed. I also, just a reminder, these minutes are not the record of note for the meeting. That's the recording of the video itself. So if someone wants to learn more about that, that's where we encourage them to go. But yeah, maybe I'll ask our admin help. What would be the way, if we want to make a change like that, how would we go about it? Do we need some sort of clarification at this meeting, or can we, if there's general approval from the board that a statement of board support for the regional equity scenario be added to the minutes, that might just serve fine if the board agrees that edit should be made.
Okay. Gene?
Yeah, just to follow on what Ben said, I think this may be kind of a way to keep these kinds of people having different perspectives on what a consensus was or not in the future, is to say, well, if something is put down as a consensus, and obviously if we have a roll call, then that's not an issue. It becomes very plain. So that could be done. I don't know that it's a good idea to do it because we don't necessarily have the same people here as we had at the other meetings. So, but I could think if there's something that's put down as a consensus, there could always be an asterisk, for lack of a better term, to say, to get the input from the various members of the board or discussions, please go to the transcript of the meeting, which is available at, this site. And that way people could kind of delve into it and find out exactly who felt how about what.
All right, thanks, Gene. I did ask you about this earlier, Ben. That's like some other month. I do recall that at some point board member names were being included in these minutes instead of being just like generic board members or this board member. It was like, say, like Jesse just said she liked this because of this reason, and then James said he liked this one because this is like it's too vague for me. So I mean, I guess what would you like to see us do here, Jesse?
I wrote you back about that, Corey, when you emailed me that our admin staff is following new guidance from Marty about that. And again, that's because the meeting itself is the record, is the actual record of the meeting, the recording, not the minutes. And so it's a way for them to take quicker notes and leave it that vague. So I guess I'm not sure.
I would support adding a statement saying the majority of the board supported the equity model, because I do think that reflected what happened in the meeting. I feel like in that case, if the recording is the actual, sort of story of what happens, then the number and the amount of notes should be really, really pared back. And if we have 3 plans, not like 50 projects or 150 projects to consider, I think going on record is preferable, or at least saying the majority is important, because what I don't think is okay is to have the minutes not reflect what like the broad strokes are. So I agree that the detail with the recording is really helpful, but if the take home isn't captured by what's recorded about the meeting, I feel like that's worrying. I mean, I feel like we want what's in writing to reflect what we think happened.
Okay. So I guess the way I will handle this is
Does everyone agree that that was the general consensus of the board at last meeting first, I guess? Does everyone agree with Jesse that the regional equity received kind of the most support and should be mentioned as such in the minutes?
If you agree, you can just raise your hand. Okay.
Jessica and Jean and Jimmy, no?
Yeah.
Well, my memory's not that good. I don't know if it was a general consensus or not. I was pretty much evenly split between the equity and the middle, the second choice. For me personally,
Yeah, I agree with the equity. I think that was almost everybody, if not everybody. It was definitely a majority.
Okay.
I think that I can, I feel like I have enough to go off of to add a sentence to the minutes that would not be betraying Jean's mutual affinity for the enhanced connections option to say that in general, the board showed significant support for the regional equity option. Would that suffice for you? Does that mean
Any objection to that? Kip, did you have something you wanted to say?
It just seemed like there was support for the latter two options. I don't know if it was, I agree that there was more voice support for the equity plan, but it seemed like the latter two had just general support as well.
Okay. And I've been messaging Aaron. He's not able to join us at the meeting, but I've been messaging him, and he said that what would be really helpful for them as they put, as they take public comment on this is that to specifically either in your board comments, since it's not an agenda item this month, or on your own to specify what about the scenarios exactly you like, and then to provide feedback on the types of projects and any specific elements or projects contained within the scenarios on the website. So again, that can be, again, the how we reflect last meeting's support in the minutes. I got some thumbs up from a general statement that acknowledges, that leaves everything that's in there now and then adds, which does acknowledge the enhanced connections receiving some favorable support as well. But just saying that in general, more people seem to prefer the regional equity scenario.
Yeah, okay, I think that was kind of the idea we got there. Is there any objections to Ben doing that? All right, seeing none, go ahead, Ben. Thank you.
Okay, I can work with Soraya on getting that taken care of.
All right, on to the next. General public comments. I don't know if how would we know, like, if there's anybody that has called in, I guess. I don't see any, so I'm just going to move on. Is there any general comments that any of the board members would like to make? Go ahead, Jesse.
I just wanted, it occurred to me today because I was sitting at the intersection of Higgins and Brook Street, right by Hellgate High School, that we've never specifically talked about the study about Higgins that is going to happen. But I just wanted to make sure that intersection will be included, because I see crazy stuff happen there all the time with people walking and biking. And I worry about that intersection. And so Ben can probably answer that, but I just want to be sure it would be included.
Yes, it will be. We're just starting to draft the RFP for that study, and so we need to do some more internal vetting, and it will go out by the end of the month, hopefully. And we hope to have a firm selected, as soon as we can, and get up and running. We are specifying that the Bike Ped Board will be an interest group, if not a stakeholder in that plan. And so like that, we're building that into the RFP, is that people whoever's selected will have to come and present to the Bike Ped Board and get feedback. And if there's opportunity for a member to sit on the steering committee or planning, advisory committee or something, we'll see if that happens. We don't know yet exactly what the format the study is going to look like for what the public process is going to be, but at the very least, it will include them coming to board meetings and talking about what's happening.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I just, we hadn't talked about it specifically, but I just wanted to be sure. And thanks for including the bike board in that as a stakeholder. And Jean, I'm just going to make the comment now. I'm happy to be part of your working group. I read your all your information about that. It sounds really interesting. And so I would be interested in doing that. And then based on what Aaron would like, I would say I support the equity plan. I said it last meeting, but I'll say it again, particularly the connection to the Mullen area that will provide bikeways for the development of whatever they project, 10,000 households out there. I think it's super important.
Go ahead, Gene.
Okay, thanks, Corey. Yeah, just because I noticed, Corey, in one of the emails I got from you, you had mentioned that there's an email for the bike board, but you were having trouble getting access to it. So I don't know how that's being taken care of, but it kind of generated a question in my mind. If we want to get more public input, besides just people getting online here to raise a point during a board meeting. If emails come in with citizen concerns about a certain intersection, a pedestrian crossing, poor sight lines, whatever, and that email comes in, who has access to it? Is it just Ben, or is it any member on the board? And how do we get in and see the any public input that's coming in as emails to the bike ped board?
The email address is bpab@ci.missoula.mt.us, and that just should forward to every member's own email. It's not like you have to log into a new email to send. Corey let me know he was having issues, and maybe, Corey, are you not getting my emails? Because I reached out to you saying, what exactly is your error message? Because IT needs that to know how to fix it, and then I never heard back from you.
Yeah, the message that I get back is that I am not an authorized sender. So I don't know what that means. Your city's IT department would know what that means, but I don't.
Okay, but that's
what's stopping me from using it.
Sender. Okay. So, yeah, but that should be the avenue that people can use. If you find an interesting article that you want your fellow board members to read, you don't need to know everyone's address. Just bpab@ci.missoula.mt.us.
Did I answer your question, Gene?
Yeah, so in other words, if something goes in, let's say if I send an email into that, then it should actually get forwarded into my email box.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. All right, does anybody else have any other comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to city staff comments. Ben, how are you wanting to handle this time? You wanting to do your report and then do Madison's and your presentation?
Yeah, Madison unfortunately can't join us today. She had something come up last minute. I don't have much of a report really since the big things I've been working on are the neighborhood traffic management program and starting to work on the 2021 public works list, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. So I'd just as soon go into presentations unless people have any questions about general work that's happening around the city right now.
Okay, if there's no objection, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to start sharing my screen. Is everyone seeing a bright orange slide here? Okay. So this is kind of a follow-up on the slow speeds presentation that we gave back in October. This is kind of after we delivered that presentation to council and the mayor's office and some of the department heads, we received some feedback that they were. I guess we didn't go to council. We presented what we presented to the bike ped board to department heads and the mayor's office, and their ask was, before we go to council, since we know that the speed limits issue has some legal challenges, let's have some other recommendations and maybe roll this into the other work that you're doing around traffic calming and greenways. So that was the guidance that we received. And so now we're excited to present on the concept of a neighborhood traffic management program, which is a new program or kind of a revision of our traffic calming program. And I'll go into more detail as we go through the presentation. So again, we're giving this presentation because council had asked us to look at speed limits and speed limit changes as they related to some of the other changes that were taking place in the Public Works Manual updates that happened this summer. And so they asked us to look into it. And right around that time, there was a document published just this summer from NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials, about speeds and speed limits and setting them. And so we're going to go through some of that, look at national trends, look at speeding in Missoula, and then talk about the neighborhood traffic management program as our proposed solution to address some of the speeding challenges. So the number one goal that we have is safety in all of this. We have several planning documents that kind of dictate the need for to improve safety. The Community Transportation Safety Plan identifies intersection crashes, non-motorized crashes, and risky behaviors as kind of the three major emphasis areas that we should be trying to address. Speeding is a problem for all three. It is a risky behavior that can result in serious crashes at intersections, and speeding crashes that involve vulnerable users are more serious than they may otherwise be. Vision Zero, adopted at the state level and embraced in the Community Transportation Safety Plan, is really it's a philosophy that acknowledges that people are going to make mistakes while out and about, but that those mistakes should not be fatal or incapacitating. We have a long-range transportation plan that shows clearly that Missoula is growing. It's identified mode share goals, or the percentage of how people get around, and it prioritizes neighborhood greenways as a way to get to those mode split goals. And in order to make our neighborhood greenways safe, comfortable, and convenient for people of all ages and abilities to bike and walk on, then traffic needs to be a little bit slower. So safety is our number one goal in how we look at all of this. Also, citizens complain about speeding. It's probably the most significant complaint that anyone gets. And complaints come to my office, they go to traffic services, they go to the streets division, they go to the police department, they go to engineering. We all get complaints about speeding, and it's all across the city, all types of streets. We historically, even though we have a team that kind of evaluates these requests, we just do it on as we get a complaint, we evaluate that individual complaint, decide to do something or not based on what we see in that specific location. So we haven't had a coherent response to requests for traffic calming or even complaints about speeding. People say frequently that, if we find that people are driving the speed limit, they say, well, 25 is too fast for my street. And so that's something that we're taking into account when looking at this. The application process for traffic calming historically has been pretty onerous and requires getting a lot of signatures, and it can be confusing for some residents to understand what information we're asking for in what stages. And it's resulted in inequitable implementation of traffic calming. That's why we only see it in the University District and the River Road neighborhood or Riverfront neighborhood, largely is because it's people with time and resources to follow through on that onerous application that have received traffic calming. So speeding is a problem nationally. Pedestrian fatalities have been rising steadily since 2009, and we hit the highest levels of traffic fatalities since 1990 last year, after a couple decades of it going down. This last decade, it's been steadily rising. And that's seemingly only true in the United States. The rest of the industrialized countries they're reducing significantly their fatalities, their traffic fatalities. And here it's vulnerable users that are facing the brunt of it as car technology makes people safer in their cars. The people outside of cars are dying in higher numbers. And one of the reasons that's so is that the physics of vehicle speed, when your drivers are traveling at higher speeds, they are traveling further before they can react. And then also it takes longer to come to a stop. And so, and that becomes exponential. So if the 40 mile an hour time to stop, the distance that you travel from when you see an obstacle and need to stop is nearly triple what the 20 mile an hour time and distance is. Also, the increased risk for pedestrians, I mentioned that they're dying in higher numbers. The higher speed goes, the higher impact force is. Also, drivers' field of vision narrows the faster you're going. And so it's harder to see people coming from, crossing from a side street or coming out from behind a car or something like that. And so, again, there's a higher risk for pedestrians there or other vulnerable users. The front ends of vehicles are getting bigger. If you look at pictures of F-150s from 30 years ago and F-150s from this year, the truck is nearly double the size that it used to be. Also, there's people are buying more trucks and SUVs than smaller sedans and coupes than they used to, and so that's also playing a role in this. And the result is that it's an exponential risk as speed increases, and that at 20 miles an hour, you have a 5 to 10% chance of dying, an over 90% chance of surviving that crash. If you're hit at 40 miles an hour, you have a less than 20% chance of surviving that crash. And that's factoring this. That's an average of all mostly able-bodied adults. If you're talking about a child or an elderly person, then those numbers, those fatality rates are even higher. So in Missoula, we're seeing a rise in crashes, in reported crashes. Crashes are only reported if there's more than $1,500 in property damage, although in the study area that included, it was $1,000, which is why that's on the slide there. So our overall crashes are going down. As you can see in this chart, the fatalities and serious injuries are going down. That's the blue and red lines. So those have been decreasing, but the overall number of crashes is rising pretty significantly. That we have about 2,500 a year in the city, and so that's something that we want to address. And again, the blue and red there are fatalities and serious crashes, but the green is speed related, I believe. And so speed related crashes, nearly half of those are occurring on local streets, so not our arterials or collectors. Speed related only means above the posted speed or driving too fast for conditions. Although it's certainly arguable that any crash is a result of driving too fast for the conditions, because the person driving didn't have time to react to avoid the crash. And so even then, we think that there's that speed related is an underrepresented crash factor. Is all that's to say. Inclement weather and conditions can play a role. I forget the exact percentage, but it's not insignificant of crashes that happen during snow and icy times. But there's also a lot of crashes that don't happen during really bad weather. And so, but when you look closer, just because it's sunny and nice, at rush hour in the spring and fall here, because of the way our grid sits, if you're driving east and west, you have the sun directly in your eyes in either the morning or the afternoon. And that's right when more people are traveling. So that wouldn't get an inclement weather or condition report, but it certainly factors into the risk of driving at faster speeds. And these crashes cost Missoula a lot of money. The Community Transportation Safety Plan estimates a 5-year total of $475 million in wage loss, medical and administrative expenses, property damage, and insurance costs. And of that, 49 million is estimated to be speed-related crashes. And that doesn't factor in the kind of loss of quality of life and the loss of an actual human life. I mean, that insurance companies assign a value to that human life based on, like, it shows wage losses and things like that, but it's immeasurable when you actually think about people. So why do people speed? There's some psychological factors, like there's no real stigma for speeding. It's not punished very heavily. When it is, you can usually talk your way out of it. We see that in the court system where they routinely throw out speeding tickets unless they're 8 or 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. And so that's where our PD has started enforcing speeds at about 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. So that's already really fast. People believe that speeding saves them time when in reality, a trip of less than 50 miles is you're going to save seconds, if that, and it's just as likely to be lost at the next traffic signal any time that you made up by speeding. And then brain development and age. We see that young drivers are more likely to speed, and Missoula and Montana has a high percentage of young drivers, since we can drive very early. At 14 and a half, you can get your license here. So it's we have a larger group of young drivers than other places in the country. There's also physical factors that induce speeding. Roadway design is the primary one. So there's such a thing as design speed, and I'm not going to go into all the details, but basically when engineers and road builders are planning a street, they set a design speed that's based on the capacity of the roadway and how many vehicles they think they have to move, and how fast can they make it while still being relatively safe. And that is what we've seen, is that design speeds are inherently higher than the posted speed, but that the speed that people actually travel is then also higher than the posted speed, because people typically go close to what the roadway is designed for. It's why when you're driving over the Higgins Street Bridge under normal, Higgins Avenue Bridge under normal circumstances, if you're going 25, you're getting passed in the other lane because the design speed of that bridge is 35 miles an hour. And so people typically, they go closer to 35 than 25. Side friction or lack thereof can influence speeding. By that I mean parked cars or tree canopy or other things on the kind of periphery of the roadside, curb versus not having a curb. They help reduce speed. Even striped lines can help reduce speeds. We've seen that on some streets. Other streets, it hasn't worked out that well, so we're unclear exactly why that works some places and not others, but it's something to think about. New development, the trees are smaller, the houses are typically, it's a little more suburban than our traditional development in town. Our streets are wider, it feels more open, and so people speed in our new developments. But even in town, our street widths are kind of holdovers from the old horse and buggy days, when they needed to be wide enough that a horse and buggy could do a U-turn. And so that's what has helped set a lot of our western right-of-way widths. It's not like the East Coast, where they're kind of old horse trails and cow trails, and so you have really narrow roads. It's a little more European back there, but west of the Mississippi, we've really come of age with the automobile, and as a result, our streets are really wide. We have Missoula-specific conditions. Again, wide streets, both in our new developments and in the heart of town. We have a high preponderance of uncontrolled intersections, and there's actually national guidance that says that at 25 miles an hour, you're supposed to have 115 feet of unobstructed sight distance to the cross street. We typically don't have that in our residential neighborhoods. There's boulevard trees, landscaping, parked cars, and even houses in the way of that triangle. Large truck traffic uses our local streets. Our truck routes don't always get people where they're trying to go. And even though we have designated truck routes, there's still, there are industrial areas along the railroad tracks, for example, that need heavy truck traffic going through the neighborhoods. We have a lack of consistent and connected bike ped infrastructure. Our sidewalks start and stop. Our bike lanes end at busy intersections. They're not fully connected to each other. And so that places more vulnerable users in the street with vehicles. We have changing weather and sun and shade conditions. Not only do we have snow and ice and freeze thaw conditions, but like I mentioned, we have those windows during high peak travel times that it can be very bright right in your eyes. And then we have our neighborhood greenways, which we've established about 5 years ago but really want to ensure that they're safe and comfortable for everyone, they need to be a little bit slower for people of all ages and abilities. So that leads to the kind of culmination that the determination, our staff determination, is that 25 miles an hour is inappropriate for some low volume urban streets, certainly for low volume urban streets, and even for some higher volume local urban streets. So knowing that, how do we reduce the speed limits? Well, how do we reduce speeds? Do we lower speed limits? Again, that's the picture of the new guidance there, city limits. It's available for free online if anyone is interested in reading that more, but blanket speed limit reductions can be effective. They're relatively low cost. They're being implemented in a lot of places, but they're not currently feasible in Missoula due to state laws that basically say that 25 is as low as we can go without a engineering and traffic study. And even though the law is a little bit vague, that is historically always meant on a corridor by corridor basis. And so that is how that would likely have to go, at least for our attorneys to feel comfortable defending it. What about roadway design? I mentioned that influences speed greatly. So what if we what if we change roadway design? Traffic calming can be very effective, but it's historically onerous and inequitable, as I mentioned at the beginning. It's also cost prohibitive. An example is that a permanent concrete traffic circle in an intersection, and I don't mean like the Higgins roundabout, I mean like a little one in a neighborhood, a neighborhood street, it's about $20,000 these days. When you factor in all of the drainage work that you have to do at the corners and bringing those up to ADA, to meet ADA, and that gets assessed to the adjacent property owners, and not necessarily just the four corners, but it's still a very heavy lift for our neighborhoods that are feeling increasingly squeezed, by taxes and other cost of living expenses. So that's a hard sell to be able to continue to implement traffic calming equitably. What about additional enforcement? This might be the one that most people say, well, if people are speeding, just pull them over more. And what the research shows is that's not very effective. You're only really pulling over the person on that you're pulling over. Maybe some people see that person, but there's not. It doesn't have a lot of longevity in that in what's happening. It can be potentially harmful to Black, Indigenous, and people of color. That at any time you're increasing reasons to stop people, you can. Studies have shown that people of color are stopped with more frequently, despite driving less than white people. It's also potentially harmful to low-income or cost-burdened households if we're writing tickets. We currently don't have a progressive fee schedule, and I don't even know if we'd be allowed to, but in Sweden, you get your speeding ticket is charged based on what you can afford to pay. So if you're driving a Ferrari, you're paying at least a 5-digit, if not a 6-digit speeding ticket. And if you're in a jalopy, then it's a few bucks. And so the idea is that it is, we don't have that. So again, it's disproportionately impacting our lower income folks. And perhaps most importantly, it's just infeasible with our current funding and resource allocation. We have 2.5 traffic cops for the entire city all week. So that's 2.5 traffic cops 5 days a week to do all traffic related stuff. And so that's just not enough to reasonably provide enforcement as a way to deter speeding. Finally, what about education? Is that the way to reduce speeds? Safety campaigns have limited effectiveness on their own. They are great to combine with other things like traffic calming, but again, they're by themselves, they're not very effective. At best, it's difficult to evaluate their efficacy, and it's also difficult to ensure equity. Again, the people that take this most seriously seem to be people with the time and resources to be able to do something like that. So if none of those work on their own, what are we recommending? Our neighborhood traffic management program encompasses all of the above. So primarily, to review, we're talking about residential streets that are locally owned, not state owned, like our arterials and collectors. We're using an interdepartmental work team, including people from traffic services, the streets division, engineering, my office, police, fire, attorney's office, to make sure that we're doing as good a job as we can. We're coordinating this work with the community investment program and our transportation safety team, just to make sure that we're that projects that we can do through this program, that we're doing those effectively, but that if things need to be elevated, if it's more expensive and kind of a bigger, has more regional significance, it might get elevated to the CIP program. We're developing a clear workflow to be both proactive on our neighborhood greenway network and to be reactive to citizen response. And we're using lighter, quicker, cheaper traffic calming, as well as the other E's of traffic safety: engineering, enforcement, encouragement, education, and evaluation. And we're using data to guide our proactive workflow. So one of the things that this program will do is it divides these local residential streets into 3 different classifications. Currently, we have arterials, collectors, and local streets are our 3 different classifications. And so we're dividing the locals then into neighborhood greenways, which are prioritized for people of all ages and abilities to bike and walk. Our local streets, just kind of a regular local residential street. And then a residential collector is it's typically a vehicular through street, but we still want it to be comfortable for people for the residents who live there and for most non-motorized users. They carry higher volumes. They might tolerate some higher speeds, but we want them to still be safe. They're where we have been prioritizing our sidewalk projects. And so, they're where our other policies would recommend that we stripe bike lanes if possible. So we have different operational goals for these different streets. So for example, a neighborhood greenway, we're going to target a 15-mile-per-hour speed, travel speed. Our target volume is to keep it under 1,000 cars per day. Stop signs, we want as few as possible on a neighborhood greenway because we want it to be a good through street for biking. And then we want to consider wayfinding elements along those as well. A local street, we might tolerate slightly higher speeds, about the same amount of volumes. Stop signs, though, are perfectly acceptable in a local street. If anything, we might encourage them because we don't want those to be used instead of collectors, and we'll get to an example in a little bit. But local streets can sometimes have transit on them, and so we want to be sure, and both mountain line and beach, and so we want to be sure to coordinate with buses if we're doing anything to those local streets. And then finally, a residential collector, we tolerate higher speeds. 25 miles an hour is probably appropriate for those. Higher volumes, 1,000 to 6,000. We'd only stop them at higher classified streets, but these are streets that we are strongly recommending bike lanes following routine maintenance, and they're being prioritized in our sidewalk and in our CIP program. So the proactive response is we'll look at our neighborhood greenways. We have those prioritized based on some criteria: neighborhoods, equity, connectivity, access to destinations, that sort of thing. And we're going to look a block in either direction to ensure that we don't push traffic problems just one street away. And then we will develop a traffic calming program or traffic management program that uses some combination of traffic calming and traffic control, as well as education and enforcement components. We will implement it and work with the public both before implementation, during and after, and collect data and revisit as needed. So this summer, Franklin and Maurice were kind of the test cases for the lighter, quicker, cheaper traffic calming. Once we got kind of full support from police and fire and engineering to keep doing that, then we said, okay, how can we do those in a more systematic and equitable manner? And how can we have the most impact? If we can do a handful of these a year, how can we have the most impact? We decided it's along the neighborhood greenways, and then again, one street on either side. So here's an example from the Franklin to the Fort neighborhood, where there's a neighborhood greenway. North is actually to the right of your screen as you're looking here. South is to the left. So the neighborhood greenways are in green, and so we look one block to the west, which is off the screen to the top, is a collector, and so we say, hey, that's prioritized for sidewalks, and it's going to get sidewalks in the next 2 to 4 years, and so we're not proposing any changes to that right now. But we are going to propose some traffic calming along the greenway, and then some traffic calming and control along the local street that's one block to the east of the greenway. And so those circles, those blue circles, are similar to what got installed in Franklin and Maurice. And then the stars are kind of painted bulb outs, similar to what we have proposed at 3rd and Myrtle that I'm working on with Jessica. And basically, yeah, it's delineators and paint to create bulb outs at the intersections. And then the local street here would have some additional stop signs added to it as well. That's what the larger stops are proposed. The existing are new. So what we saw on these streets is that the local street to the east of the greenway, the volumes far exceeded what we would want to see on a local street. It was about 2,500 cars per day. And speeds were high, the crash history was high. And so that told us, gee, we need to do something about that. We don't want traffic on that street in such a high volumes, and crashes are too frequent. So we thought that the combination of traffic calming and traffic control would lead fewer people to use it as a cut-through as a cut-through street. And so the goal is now to work with the neighborhood, share with them this plan, and encourage them to talk to their friends and neighbors about it, and help enhance, again, because we're using those lighter, quicker, cheaper methods. Hopefully the neighbors will enhance the circles and bulb outs with paint and chalk and other things that can draw attention and help create a sense of place within the neighborhood. So while we hope to do a couple of those this summer and working up to about 5 a year in coming years, the data collection will slow us down a little bit this first year as we get a few rolling. But we also, again, I mentioned that we receive a lot of complaints, and so we want to be reactive as well to what citizens want. So we'll collect the complaint and learn as much as we can about what people are seeing on their street. And then we'll collect data, get baseline speed and volumes and crash histories. We'll look at those kind of operational goals and see if the street meets the intended function. We'll let the complainant know if it does or it doesn't. And then we'll develop a plan using education and enforcement first, but also, and then we'll score the requests that we get, and we'll prioritize based on scores what we do. And then we'll develop a similar traffic calming and control plan, work with the neighbors and implement it as we can. And then again, collect post-implementation data and revisit if needed. So the lighter, quicker, cheaper circles, or traffic calming, this is a major innovation for us. It's happening kind of all over the place, but this is more or less what ours look like. They're short term in that we don't expect them to be there for years and years and years, but what we hope is that we get these installed at no additional cost to the neighborhood or taxpayers around there, and then when we come through with a sidewalk or street reconstruction project, we reevaluate and see if it's something that the neighborhood might want to contribute towards. These, again, I mentioned that a concrete circle in the middle of an intersection is about 20 grand. We can do about a mile. Maurice was nearly a mile from South Avenue to Beckwith, and that cost us under $5,000 to do all of Maurice. To do 3 circles, a bunch of stop signs, some sharas, some yellow curb, was under 5 grand. So it's an order of magnitude cost difference. I think we've decided that each circle is about, like this, is about $750. The hope is that they can establish a neighborhood sense of community and pride. If people have seen the Maurice ones, one of them has been really thoroughly painted and looks very cool, with like a mandala or a Spanish, I think it's actually more of a Spanish tile print than a Hindu print, but there's another kind of hexagon pattern in one of them on Franklin Street. So hopefully neighbors can come out and build a sense of community around these. The circles themselves, by being so lightweight, we can adapt them and help inform kind of circle size and how well they deflect traffic and calm traffic. So that each one kind of becomes its own test case for the future. Hopefully by being able to do these more broadly around the city, we can generate diverse interest. We can certainly serve underserved neighborhoods, and empower the public to feel like we're taking them seriously. I hear a lot that people just want a bone thrown to them. They understand that big projects are expensive and that we have large scale planning processes to help determine how those happen, but they just want something done now. And so we think that this can go a long way to helping with that. I mentioned the 6 E's before. Again, they're engineering, education, enforcement, encouragement, equity, and evaluation. This is a lens that we kind of looked at our larger planning efforts through, but it's kind of applying it to this fine a point is something that's a little new for us. And so we're excited to be as holistic as possible in our approach. And so finally, just to recap, the Neighborhood Traffic Management Program will address our rising crash numbers citywide, our high crash rates on some local streets, the high crash severity we see at uncontrolled intersections, the fact that 25 miles an hour is inappropriate for some conditions, that we are seeing increased traffic due to population growth and infill development. That being said, this past year, traffic has been lighter than 2019, but our crashes are just as high and speeds are higher potentially in 2020 than they were in 2019. Decreased traffic enforcement, I mentioned that we have 2.5 traffic cops for the entire city. 10 years ago, we had 5.5, and so police has changed how they manage their resources, and we need to deal with that. Again, the fact that we have lack of comprehensive connected bike ped facilities, we're working on that with this program. It will help really establish the neighborhood greenways and really connect those without having to build a lot of hardscape right away. And then our lack of coherent response to citizen traffic calming requests and the onerous requirements when we do get them. So yeah, we're really excited to roll this out. We've received a lot of positive support from council and the administration. We're doing this within existing budgets, at least for the first year, seeing how it will go. And with the exception of a couple homeowners that didn't like the aesthetics of one of the circles on Maurice, we've received overwhelmingly positive support from the neighborhoods for the Franklin and Maurice installations. And so we look forward to rolling out some more this spring. With that, I'll offer it up to questions.
Okay, let's see here. Kip, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say I think this is a super exciting program. I actually live on Maurice in student housing. So I was really psyched to see that pop up. I'm just curious, are speed bumps being considered as part of the plan? I've lived in other places, namely Fort Collins, Colorado, where the long, kind of not super, they're a little taller, but mostly long speed bumps seem to deter cars driving really fast, but don't slow down bikes like slower than 10 miles an hour kind of thing. And I was just curious what the finances of that is. That was a possibility.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Kip. Thanks. So we are, for the first time ever, we are considering speed humps. Speed bumps are those terrible, dangerous things in mall parking lots. Speed humps are the more elongated, gradual, gentler sloped, still very effective without the damage to vehicle undercarriages or potentially damage to cyclists' lives. Someone died going downhill and hit a speed bump. I forget exactly where, but it's rare, but that sort of thing has happened. So yes, we've always been told that fire was opposed to them, and they've said that if they're gentle and gradual, we even have some on Patty Creek Road that have cutouts for fire truck wheels to be able to go through. So yes, those are on the table, and actually our streets superintendent is super excited about trying out some different sizes and molding them out of asphalt and seeing how they work. So even though I didn't show any in that current proposal, that would be kind of the next thing that we would add after those stop signs and traffic calming features, that if that didn't get the results that we wanted to, then we would look at being a little more aggressive with speed humps.
What the cost of one of those would be ish?
I don't know offhand. Again, an engineered one that is like you cut the asphalt out and put in concrete would be pretty significant. That's what the Patty Creek ones are. But that's why our streets superintendent is excited, because he thinks he can do it with kind of leftover asphalt that he has from other jobs. And so he would be hard pressed to put a dollar figure to it, because he would just do it as, while he's driving by, essentially. Negligible. The individual speed hump is probably a negligible cost. Doing some sort of citywide rollout obviously would cost some money. And so figuring out what is going to work the best, how and when, that's part of the program, is that we get to be kind of experimental like that. The other thing about doing them in asphalt is that if we didn't get it right, we can scrape it and try again.
Okay. Yeah, and I have no idea what the public perception of that. I know in general people don't like speed bumps or humps or whatever, but just from my own experience, they really do slow down cars. And when you make those long ones, they seem to be really effective and bind to bike over. I don't know.
Yeah, it's been a practice on Portland's neighborhood greenways to do that. That example that I showed over in Franklin of the Fort, the neighborhood greenway there, the traffic volumes are already so low that we didn't feel like we really needed to do that. But it's on the table. We just want to do as little as possible in each place, so that, again, we can be more diverse around the city and places that we can get to.
All right, Jean?
I have a comment.
Okay, go
I
ahead.
couldn't figure out how to read it. So I'm thinking about these speed humps and wondering, is it also an opportunity to elevate the pedestrians so cars can see them better, such as at the trail crossing on California at the Bitterroot Trail?
Raised crosswalks are also definitely on the table, and that's something that we could certainly look into at that location.
Another thing I thought about when you mentioned hardscape is wondering whether removing the hardscape in the center of a traffic circle is an opportunity to improve drainage or snow storage, things like that. Like, what is the consideration of the difference in expense of removing the center of the intersection versus just covering it?
You mean like actually chopping out the asphalt within those painted circles?
It would seem that would be the better environmental choice.
It's a good question, Britt. I'll have to look into that and get back to you. It hasn't really come up in like the idea of depaving in general. We've started to kick around, but a lot of people aren't there yet. So, but the specifics of within those circles, I'll certainly ask and see what people think.
Yeah, because a $20,000 budget for a circle would surely be enough to dig it out, I would think, and make it permeable again to the aquifer.
Well, that's not what I mean. That 20,000 is the fully landscaped circles. The concrete ones that you see in, like in the university district that have plants and trees in them.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thanks, Britt. Oh, and just FYI, if you want to use *9 to raise and lower your hand. Okay, Gene?
Yeah, thanks, Corey. Yeah, on the traffic circles, I'm Kip's neighbor. I'm on Mansfield, so I'm a block over from you, Kip, in the university area, Mansfield and Beverly. And yeah, the circles seem to be working really nice there. One of the things it does is it does create sort of a speed table because of the crowning of the road, as much as the circling around or swerving around, if you will. This is for cars going straight through. So I think they become effective that way, especially when in the residential streets, with all the chip sealing and everything, I think they tend to have a little bit more crown to the road, at least in my neighborhood, than some of the other streets I've been on. So it effectively makes sort of a speed table or speed, not a speed bump, but a speed hump out of it. The other thing I wanted to bring up was, I made a note here, gotta go back and find it. Ben, you mentioned the keeping in the greenways stop signs as few as possible. In looking around, I think we've all experienced this, is basically nobody stops for stop signs. I mean, technically, people don't stop. They slow, whether you're on a bike or a car, people slow down to basically a walking speed. They kind of cruise through the crosswalk. They check if there's not a pedestrian coming. They kind of cruise past the stop sign onto the crosswalk so they can get far enough out to check for traffic. And then if there's traffic, obviously they stop for it. If there's no traffic, they continue and speed up to enter that side street or go through the intersection. So I guess my question is, what's the potential to keep all the bicyclists technically legal, not to get harassed for pulling a stop sign, is to replace some of these stop signs, maybe on a interim basis, or with the yield signs. And obviously, you can't do it for a four-way, but for a two-way stop, to replace the stop sign with the yield sign, and kind of get the feedback from the neighborhood and see what happens.
Yeah, that's definitely on the table, or replacing stop signs with circles on our greenways. That's also a possibility. But yeah, that's something that we're going to look at, is where can we remove those stock conditions, and where might they need to be added? Again, based on not having the visibility to actually see.
Yeah. Well, I got one new stop sign a block away from me on Maurice and Beverly, which wasn't there before, and because of the circles, they put one in. And given the sight lines, which are quite good at that intersection, I know nobody's going to stop for those stop signs because they can see the traffic coming. Obviously, they'll stop if there's traffic, but I think that's one of the places where a yield sign would be just as effective and smart as a stop sign.
All right, we'll look into that for sure.
All right, thanks, Gene. Jessica?
Cool. Yeah, this is exciting. It's fun to see it kind of come together, because I know we talked about it this summer. Seems like the kind of key to uniting the proactive and reactive response is how you're working with the neighborhoods. And I was just curious where you are on that currently. Like, does that mean going and talking to the neighborhood councils, or like when people complain, kind of bringing them into the conversation and following up?
All of the above. It's going through the neighborhood councils and working with Colin Woodrow, who is the new neighborhood coordinator, whatever that position is called. And he really wants to be more proactive just in general in how we reach out to neighborhoods. So it's not just so the neighborhood leadership teams and councils aren't just venues for like negative complaining and NIMBYism. And so one of the ways that we're looking into doing that is using the Engagement HQ online platform, or Engage Missoula, I think is how you would Google it. And so we're kind of developing what we're calling playing cards. Madison and I are developing a series of kind of non-infrastructure interventions that neighbors can do to help reduce speeds and create a sense of place. Things like putting out those "drive like your kids live here" signs, or putting up a little free library in their yard, a bench along the sidewalk, things that communicate to everyone that pedestrians are here, that people live here, that this public space is for people and not just for motor vehicles. And so we have a suite of at least 3 dozen of these types of suggestions, things like a neighborhood scavenger hunt, or organizing a group walk, or any sort of thing like that to help build community and get the word out. Those things are we're providing like brief little info about how someone might be able to go about doing, trying to plant the seeds so that people can then take those and run with them.
Okay, thanks, Jessica. Kip, you have some more?
Yeah, just a couple other questions. How would someone go about getting approval to make art in one of those roundabouts, Ben? Or is that like not?
Let email me. Email me are you interested, or are you interested in doing it yourself? Or?
I don't know, not necessarily. I'm not really an artist, but I was just curious if, you could tap into like a university class, at least in this neighborhood, that would be an applicable group. And,
yeah,
something like that.
We're still working out what sorts of city approvals may or may not be needed for that.
Okay. And the other question I have is, do you have data on, I know there's like the 2 cables that when you drive over, do those give you speed? And if so, is there do you have like average speed, like high speed of the day? Like, I don't know, I just feel like those numbers might be really useful to, maybe you already showed that on the presentation, but just to highlight the safety concern. Because every once in a while you see a car just raging by, I don't know.
Yeah, so those do provide speeds, and our printouts are by hour. We can do them by hour, by day. They show you kind of thresholds that people go over. And the trailers that we put out that tell you how fast you're going as you drive by them, those also collect data. So those are the 2 ways we collect vehicle data. We have counters for bicyclists and pedestrians too, that also use hoses like that for the bikes, and then they have an infrared that gets pedestrians. Those don't tell you how fast the bikes are going, but we do get numbers. So interestingly, on Maurice, we were seeing this summer, like 140 bike riders a day on Maurice, on the block or 2 blocks away from campus. So that's pretty high traffic street for not having bike lanes and not having, again, it's on our Greenway network, but it doesn't really connect to too much. And it still has a lot of bike traffic on it.
Is there a way to look up the car speed somewhere?
No, like in a particular, again, if you email me a specific location, I can maybe look it up. We don't have anything public facing, and we certainly don't have data on every street or anything like that.
I just wonder if, I don't know, if that would be a helpful way to kind of reach out and just be like, every day a car drives by 40, that kind of a stat that might be helpful, just to be like, that's too fast. I don't know, something like that.
We do, and we share that with the police too. It's funny, there was we got complaints on Duncan Drive and up north of Greeno on the west side of the Rattlesnake. And basically they said, yeah, every day at 12:15, this car comes flying up and then flying down. We did their speed counts, and sure enough, we found someone going 60 at 12:15 every day. And we had the police go up there, and it was a high school kid that was racing home for lunch and then racing back to school. And so that sort of thing, we have been able to use that in the past. And it's certainly, the printouts, if you have one person doing 75 at 3 a.m, it's really tough to know if that's a police officer or not. And so it's not always the most helpful if it's just one. But when you start to see trends, every day there's a handful of people that's going over 35 on a 25-mile-an-hour street, and that tells us that we might want to address that.
Okay, thanks, Kit. Any other questions for Ben about the neighborhood traffic management program? All right, Gene.
Yeah, I just want to quick interject. Ben, you mentioned, I don't know if Kip mentioned or not, the trailers. They have one up here on Mansfield during the time they were getting ready for the Maurice traffic circles. And I talked to some of the people that were doing it, the technicians, and they told me all about, they have a report like almost car by car and what time the car went by and how fast it was going. And I think they said one of the things that happens, at least for a few days, up through about maybe a week, excuse me, is that with the digital printout that shows your speed, and then like a lot of times on Van Buren, lower Van Buren, if you're going over the 25, then it starts to flash, and it says, oh, you're going too fast. And that really kind of kicks in for some people that just kind of are on cruise control, so to speak, and don't realize they're speeding. So I think just having those trailers there every once in a while on some of these streets can be a good traffic calming measure. It doesn't work if they stay there for months at a time, because then they're ignored. But I think putting one in certain spots for a couple weeks at a time and then maybe coming back 5-6 months later and doing it again can be helpful to keep some of this neighborhood speeding a little bit more under control without a lot of extra expense.
Yep, and that's kind of a main component of the reactive approach of this program. When we get complaints, those are the sorts of things that we're going to do first while we develop plans to actually to see if it needs traffic management more than just some education like that. But that is an educational tool that we have at our advantage. I'm going to be real quick about this, but because people ask for those a lot on the streets, not just temporarily, but they want permanent ones, like on Van Buren. And so the research is pretty clear that those are not effective at long-term, at reducing speeds long-term, unless most of the following conditions are present. You're on a steep grade. You have a speed limit change of at least 10 miles an hour. You have a jurisdictional change from like county to city or state highway to county road or something like that. What else? It's enforced with some regularity, and a large volume of the traffic is through traffic, and it's not just the people who live there. And so that's why that Van Buren placement, Van Buren itself is a good street for one of those. The placement is probably, if we were doing it today, it would be further up the hill than where it is. It would be closer to where it changes, where the speed limit changes. We also recently installed one on Duncan in the downhill direction, where it goes from 35 to 25 and where it goes from the county to the city. And then we also installed one on Patty Canyon at the same, where it goes from 35 to 25 and where the jurisdiction changes from county to city. And so those have shown to be pretty effective. I think saw speed limits reduced by 2 to 3 miles an hour on average, which is pretty good. And so, for people who live there, if people are now going 29 instead of 32, they don't think it's that great, but it's still, and in the world of, when you have a few thousand cars a day and they're all going a little bit slower, then overall risk is being decreased, and that is a safer street.
Okay. Anybody else? All right. Thanks, Ben. Okay. So did you have anything you needed to report on or wanted to report on?
Did what?
As far as your regular report, is there anything you wanted to add or say?
Nope. Again, I think that it's just the, as far as I know, it's just the public works list.
Okay. All right, then we'll go ahead and move on. I kind of a little bit of background. There's some discussion about quorums and who needs to be together for meetings and when's the meeting considered. I hope we got that resolved. So I had mentioned in an email that I was going to present this motion to dissolve all the standing committees. I do recall James at the last meeting, saying that he would support the idea as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and move to dissolve all of our standing committees. And I would add that if the committee, there needs to be some good reason for a committee. Otherwise, we can just use these working group ideas where it's a few members working on the subject. Anyway, so move to dissolve all the standing committees and to limit creating any other committees based on necessity. Any discussion, objections? Okay. All in favor? Any opposed? All right, we'll go ahead and consider all standing committees dissolved. All right, and then the final item we have on our agenda is the Public Works project list.
Yeah, so did everyone get a chance to view that? It was attached to the agenda.
It was a little confusing, Ben. It was kind of arranged weird because there was that last sheet was like some numbers that didn't really seem to connect to anything above that.
I guess I'm not sure. Was it not just the spreadsheet? That was what I attached to the agenda, was a spreadsheet.
Yeah, it was part of and it's posted on our agenda link. The first one is, it's not really a spreadsheet. It looks more like a typed up list, but it didn't get like shrunk to where we could see all the relevant information. It kind of expanded out and
that seems
yeah,
weird because I just uploaded an Excel document to the agenda. Soraya, are you there? Do you have any input on why that Excel document might not have been attached to the agenda?
Because it was more of a formatting issue.
Sorry, I can't remember what kind of document, but I think I had a PDF, and that's what I have attached.
Okay. Well, I didn't. I uploaded an Excel to eScribe. Maybe we need to get together and figure out how to make sure that that's what's going up in the future. And maybe anyways, I'll share my screen then, since I have it in a slightly more usable form than the PDF that you saw. Are you seeing this spreadsheet over here? Okay. So basically, this is the draft list of maintenance projects that will be happening in the coming construction season. Milling and paving, typically that's when they cut out an inch or two of existing asphalt and put a new layer of asphalt on. And so this is kind of whole block sections of milling and paving. They typically get that started as soon as the asphalt plants are open again in late March, early April. And then the intermittent mill pave overlays, those are similar process, but smaller sections. And then chip seal is when they put the hot oil and small gravel down to help kind of tie in those milled and overlaid sections of asphalt and extend the life of the street. So what again, this list is draft, it's subject to change. It's also this is ambitious. Every year Brian Hensel puts more on this list than he might be able to get done. He never really knows because his budget for doing this is left over after he's done doing all of the his plowing, which sometimes requires, you know, if we get all of our snowstorms on the weekends, then he's paying overtime to plow. Whereas if all the storms happen on weekdays, then it's easier to keep within his budget. And then also how much breakup happens, how much freeze thaw happens, and are there other streets that then might need more attention than the ones that are on this list? Jesse, I saw you put your hand up. Do you have a question early on here?
No, I just wanted to express my support for certain ones of the projects. If it's not the time, then I can wait.
I'll let you get there in just a second. I'll do a brief overview of what we're looking at. This is, again, this is among the earliest we've ever looked at this list. We're really trying hard to do better at getting this. Last year was one of the latest we had ever looked at it. So we're like 4 months earlier this year than we saw it last year, which is great. So we have some time. I don't expect us to go through each and every one of these this year. I wanted to provide an introduction, hopefully foster some discussion from the board, and then next month really sit down and formulate recommendations that would likely be adopted at the March meeting. And maybe we could get there by next month, but I think there's still plenty of time. So what we look at as staff when we look at this list, by we I mean me and the other planners and engineering, is we look at our planning documents, our long range transportation plan, the bicycle facilities master plan, and any other relevant area plans that might exist, and see if there are any recommendations for the particular corridor in those planning documents. And then we also look at the Complete Streets Policy and Administrative Rule 415. The Complete Streets Policy basically states that anytime we do maintenance, we want to provide facilities that are safe, comfortable, and convenient for people of all ages and all abilities to use whatever mode they choose. With the major exception that we allow ourselves to grant is if the cost of those improvements is disproportionately higher than the cost of the work that's happening. So if we're doing a chip seal project that costs $40,000, we're not gonna, that doesn't trigger sidewalk improvements that cost $1 million for that same mile. That's just a disproportionate expense to meet that Complete Streets Policy. So what that typically ends up meaning is that we look at restriping. That's typically the way that we are able to make improvements while staying within the relative affordability of the project at hand. And so the administrative rule specifies a little bit further that anytime that we are erasing the lines on a collector or arterial, staff is directed specifically to look at putting bike lanes on those streets. And so using these policy and planning documents as a guide, I've started going through and just highlighting some of the projects that I think are pretty interesting and ones that we're going to look at making some changes this year. So, and then I've also started to make notes of where we might need to seek complete streets exemptions, and those need to go through council. A written exemption needs to go through council if we're not meeting our complete streets policy when we're doing something. So this is organized by the street, the extent, from where to where, what's its classification, and that helps with the complete streets policy and admin rule. And then I go through, what does our planning document say? What does our complete streets policy admin rule say? What's the current staff recommendation? I'm going to make notes of what the bike ped board has to say, and then what sort of action might need to be taken. So going through these first, Ben Hogan, for some reason, is a collector. This is at the top of, this is near Shadows Keep, or now just the Keep, at the top of Whitaker. For some reason, this is classified as a collector. Our planning documents don't identify it as needing anything. I don't think it meets our collector volumes. Our administrative rule 415 would say bike lanes, but my current recommendation is not to worry about striping bike lanes up there, and so I'd pursue a complete streets exemption for that one. North Avenue, this is not the same section of North Avenue, so there's nothing there. High Park is a collector in the going from the foot of the South Hills, from Southwest Higgins. It winds up the hill and intersects with Whitaker near the top. That I am recommending bike lanes. That's identified in our in the long range transportation plan and in the bike facilities master plan as deserving bike lanes. Complete streets policy and the admin rule would tell us that. So the question there is, do we do bike lanes in both directions, or do we do a wide bike lane in the uphill direction and a shared lane in the downhill direction? We have about 34 feet curb to curb to play with, and so that's some food for thought. If you don't mind, I guess I'd just like to go through these and then entertain thoughts, but if people have a burning desire to speak on one, please raise your hand and just let me know. Missoula Ave, this is going to necessitate some discussion. We actually have a staff meeting tomorrow to get on the same page about what should happen there. This is between Lolo Street and Rattlesnake Drive, or Van Buren. It currently has bi-directional bike lanes and a one travel lane northbound. We want to keep, it's a very important bike connection. It's also an important pedestrian connection. A lot of runners use it. A lot of the people who live in that neighborhood use it. And so we want to provide a ped facility as well. We don't anticipate doing sidewalk, certainly not with this project, but we don't even know if it will ever happen because it's such a narrow right of way and such a weird street with a lot of county land next to it. So our likely recommendation is going to be a shared use path on one side of the street. That way we can provide a pedestrian connection as well as a bike connection, and have a better shot at meeting ADA with that connection as well. But again, we have a meeting tomorrow to discuss that, so I don't have a recommendation yet, but I'd certainly entertain board thoughts about that. Jesse, you have your hand up.
Yeah, that was one of my ones on my list. So I love that street. It's a fascinating one-way street with tons and tons of bike and ped traffic, as you said. And I think a shared use path sounds like a brilliant solution. I mean, I think it would be so utilized and make so much sense with not having right of way on that street. And it's such an important street for anyone who's riding their bike up the Rattlesnake and coming back down and using that. And it's the neighborhood's super busy. So I think a shared use path, would solve lots of problems. And it sounds like it makes the most sense. And I'm super supportive of the Missoula Avenue being on the public works list priority.
All right, thank you. I guess that's a good, the way that you phrased that was a good reminder. These are projects that largely have come to light through Brian Hensel knowing what the conditions of the streets are. But then this past year, we also hired an outside firm to do a pavement condition index and really use LiDAR to identify exactly what condition every segment of roadway in the city is. And so we have all that data, and that is really helping inform these lists moving forward, which is one of the reasons we're able to get this list a few months earlier than usual. And with the goal for next year, we hope to get 2 years worth of projects so that we can start being 2 years out on these, so we can really plan and put, find funding if we need to, if more work needs to happen than just some spot asphalt repairs. So the next one on the list, we're into the intermittent mill pave overlays. So this Missoula Ave, that's a kind of a full milling throughout the whole street. Rattlesnake Drive from Lolo all the way up to Creek Crossing. Our planning documents call for bike lanes. Our complete streets policy and admin rule would call for bike lanes. Our staff recommendation is bike lanes. Currently there's a shoulder there. We still need to figure out what we might do where the bulb outs exist right by the elementary school. That's a pinch point. They extend into what would be considered the bike lane. They extend currently at shoulder. So we still need to figure out, do we scrape those? Do we shave them down a little bit so we can still fit a minimum width bike lane there? What do we do, and how do we improve the bike connection, longitudinally along the street, while also ensuring that we have a good pedestrian crossing at the school there. So we're working on that. Lincoln Hills Drive, which connects Rattlesnake Drive, and it starts heading up to the east to the top of Jumbo. Our planning documents, going as far back as the 2011 active transportation plan, calls for a shared use path to take you all the way up to the recreation sites at the top of that, at the top of the hill, but it also acknowledges that that's going to be really difficult with right-of-way and slopes, and that it might need to be a sidewalk and sharrows in places. This project is not the one that is going to do that. This is only about a quarter mile of the flat section before it starts to climb that some of the asphalt's going to get fixed. This is near the Hellgate soccer fields and the new Syringa bike park that's up there. It's known that we need to provide bike ped space, but there just isn't current width, and we don't know. We're looking into options as to what we can do. Maybe Brian can spread an extra little bit of asphalt and we can create a little side path. But again, we're still researching what can be done there, but it's not going to meet design guidance for best practices, and so we'll likely need a complete streets exception for that. A few local streets in the Wapakia neighborhood, no recommendations. Myrtle and Third. This is on the list because of the grant that Jessica wrote to help improve that intersection, pedestrian crossing, visibility, accessibility, bike parking, etc., placemaking. And so I went to Brian and said, hey, we got this grant. Do you want to take a look and make sure that you're not going to rip up the asphalt in 2 years if we put this markings down? And he said, how about I just fix it before you actually do the project? So this is going to be the first thing that he does, is he's going to go and repair the asphalt right in the intersection, so that we have as good a canvas to work with as possible when the time comes. Linda Vista, our planning documents, this is further up the hill than the controversial section we had a few years ago. Our planning documents say bike lanes, our policies say bike lanes. I'm recommending a complete streets exemption for this after the neighbors fought hard on the bike lanes further down the hill 3 years ago, and council voted to rip them out after we had put them in. I don't want to, that's not a battle that I want to fight right now. And so I'm willing to hear what the board has to say, and either way it will have to go to council. They'll have to hear that we're not pursuing bike lanes if we go that route. So it'll be an interesting conversation to have, but I'm curious to hear what the board thinks. Scott Allen is further up the hill. That one's deemed a collector. Again, I'm not exactly sure why it's not strictly a cul-de-sac. Maybe it does connect a couple streets, but it doesn't get you fully up and down the hill up in Miller Creek the way that, say, Linda Vista does, or Lower Miller Creek does, or Christian Drive even, for that matter. So even though our admin rule would suggest bike lanes just based on its functional class, I don't think that it serves enough of a purpose to actually provide them now that we have bike lanes on Christian Drive all the way and Linda Vista, or I'm sorry, Lower Miller Creek. Some more local streets. Mount is getting, repaired between just that first block west of Brooks, but then the whole Mount from Russell to Higgins will be chip sealed this year. And so my recommendation there, it needs more discussion, but I think that that discussion is going to center around, is that two-way left turn lane needed? And if not, can we get bike lanes and maybe add even a parking lane back on some of the sections there instead of having a two-way left turn lane? And that's the only thing that's going to complicate that, I think, is beach transportation is located along there, and the school buses need a slightly wider turning radius to get in and out, but we'll see what we can do there. And then Higgins, just a couple blocks from University to Brooks are going to be repaired, especially the section in front of Hellgate is really terrible right now. And that would just look at putting that back with largely as is, with the potential of adding a bike box at the Brooks intersection to put through moving bike riders in front of vehicles, because a lot of traffic that is northbound there takes a right on 6th Street. And I've been cut off in weird ways, right, even when I think I'm taking the lane. And so giving bike riders, if you're stopped at that red light, an opportunity to really kind of stake your claim to the space to keep heading north on Higgins. That might be something that we look into. Going down to the chip seal list, there's a whole bunch of local streets that are also not, this is all in the Pleasant View neighborhood, kind of west of Home Depot. None of them are on our Greenways network, and none of them are collectors, so currently no recommendations there. Ernest is on our neighborhood Greenway network, and so looking at what that might mean, especially in context of the neighborhood traffic management program. We haven't made it that far yet. I just have identified that it's on the network. Spruce Street from Madison to Scott, so the whole length pretty much of Spruce Street. Our plans call for bike lanes. Staff, our documents, our policies call for bike lanes, and staff is recommending bike lanes. That's going to require parking removal in the section by the hospital. And so we're already working on what that could look like. And we will be working with the neighborhood on that as soon as we can. But that's kind of a high priority bike lane for us to get. 23rd, 55th, and Hillview. These are just short sections right around the triangle. Some folks might remember this from last year. Right around that little triangle near the Chief Charlo Elementary. We just didn't get to it last year. We weren't able to fix it. So that little area will get bike lanes, but it's pretty insignificant. Mary Jane Boulevard is the north-south collector through the Pleasant View neighborhood. The Mullen Area Master Plan, or I'm not even gonna try the pronunciation. I need to work on it. But they changed that to recognize that we're on Salish Kootenai land and not, and so that it has a different name. But the master plan that's happened out there is recommending protected bike lanes, and even has a way to do it through the existing. How to retrofit the existing street to get those. And so that is what we want to do, but we want to hold off until the build grant project constructs the street through to Mullen, at least on the south, if not all the way north to Broadway. And so the build grant they hope to break ground this summer. So we'd be putting that off a year, putting the striping off of a year to get protected or buffered bike lanes essentially on Mary Jane Boulevard in that section. Again, we're at Missoula Ave because that would be chip sealed following the pave. Ben Hogan, High Park, Lower Miller Creek. This is, I don't know if people have spent much time out here. This is kind of at the far southeastern edge of city limits, really just far southern edge of city limits. There's kind of new development, and there's a new roundabout out there. Where Christian Drive comes down the hill and hits Lower Miller Creek. So there are bike lanes on Lower Miller Creek. We'd want to perpetuate those if they're getting covered up. North Russell, we have some planning documents that call for protected bike lanes from Broadway north to kind of tie into the protected lanes that just got built on the bridge and section south. Our other policies are old enough that they didn't anticipate protected bike lanes, but we're going to look into the option to we have some pretty wide street there, so we're going to look at the option of getting those striped with at least on-street buffers. Corey?
Yeah, with the North Russell one, is there still talk of extending Russell out to the interstate?
I mean, that's a project potentially on the, that was part of the scenarios that were talked about last month. That was the main cost of the scenario that no one seemed to like. And even people who are of the car first mentality, that doesn't provide the congestion relief that you might think that it would. The models don't show that to work very well. And so I think appetite for that project has cooled quite a bit.
Okay, thanks, Ben.
South Avenue from Reserve to Johnson, there's existing bike lanes in the door zone there, so we're going to look closely at widths and see what we can do to maybe improve that. But again, we're not changing curb lines at all. This is just a chip seal, so we'll do what we can. Patty Canyon from Higgins to city limits. We haven't looked that closely at that one yet, but we are trying to that's one that we received some speed complaints. Again, being on the hill, we put one of those signs that tells you how fast you're going in the downhill direction. What we find is that speeds are oftentimes higher in the uphill direction. I think people step on the gas more to go uphill because their car needs a little more oomph. And so that is we're still kind of figuring that out. One of the things that is true in that situation is even if you're driving faster in the uphill direction, you can come to a stop much quicker than in a downhill direction because you have gravity working in your favor. So again, we're looking into what might go there. Our admin rule 415 would just say bike lanes. That might be too general a brush to paint here because that on-street parking is pretty well utilized. And when you remove on-street parking, you have the potential for increasing speeds if you reduce some of that friction. So we need to look carefully at that. Reserve Street from Briggs to 39th. This says collector. I don't think that it actually is. This is basically south of Fresh Market. It goes by Meadow Hill Elementary. We'll have to look closer at that. 3rd Street from Russell to Orange. This was talked about last year following the water main project. And so we have a lot more discussion there. This board at the time was kind of understood the staff position of wanting to kick the can a little bit on that one, but now we need to make a decision. I know that the board's recommendation is that we stripe bike lanes even if it means removing parking, which it'll have to. And so we need to have more conversation on that at the staff level. And I think the board knows what you want. Door Lane from Brooks to McDonald. This was striped with bike lanes following a mill and repave a couple of years ago. And so that'll get them again. Oh, excuse me. This is the section north of Brooks. We completed the bike lanes to 39th south of Brooks, and then north of Brooks, we plan to connect them because where it hits McDonald is pretty much right at the Bitterroot Branch Trail, and so all of a sudden we'll connect the South Hills to the Bitterroot Branch Trail through bike lanes there. Briggs from Miller Creek to the end. That's to the east end. Yeah, east end of Briggs at Meadow Hill, and so we're going to look closely at that and see what if that's something that we want to stripe. And then, like I said, Mount from Russell to Higgins is we're going to have internal conversation, but I'd welcome the board's feedback on that one. And then North Avenue from Johnson to Russell. the section from Garfield to Johnson, so just a small section of that, it connects 2 neighborhood greenways and the Bitterroot Branch Trail and then future bike lanes on Johnson. And so I want to provide that bike connection. And the discussion there is, would it make more sense to have a 2-way facility on one side of the street or bike lanes on both sides of the street? And my thinking, normally I'm not a fan of a 2-way facility on one side of the street, but in this instance, it would reduce the amount of crossings that you would have if you're going through those couple of streets. And so you'd reduce exposure. You also have one side of the street that has no driveways on it, and so you wouldn't have those sorts of conflicts. And you would then incur, because of that exposure that you'd get, twice, if you had to cross the street twice, you would reduce the likelihood of wrong way bike riding if you basically accommodated it on one side of the street. But I'm all ears if you have other facilities or other thoughts about that one. So that was a very quick and dirty look at these. Again, I encourage everyone, I'll send out the spreadsheet to make sure that you have it in this form. And I encourage everyone to spend some time with a map and look closer at these. And if you have questions about them, I can call up a map and go from there.
Okay, Jesse.
Okay, I just wanted to express support for the bike lanes on Mount. I think a lot of bike commuters who are trying to go east-west and west-east are using Mount for bicycling, and it feels tight at times. And I think that any efforts that could be made to make the bicycles feel like they have a little bit more space on Mount would be appreciated. Also, I just, at the top of the list, 26 North and West Central are all sort of near Big Sky High School, CS Porter, Mountain Home, Community Medical Center, and a group home. And because I taught at Big Sky for 5 years, I know those streets, the 26 Northwest Central streets, have a huge amount of pedestrian and bicycle traffic from the children and people who are flowing in and out of Big Sky High School and CS Porter. It's super busy. And so maybe we can circle back to those at the beginning of the list. They don't have any specific recommendations, but just my observations are that there is a lot of pedestrian and bicycle traffic in that area. So that's a great picture of Mount, because that is what I used to bike for my bike commute all the time. And the cars can park right there, and it is super tight, and there's a lot of drainage interaction in the bike area. There's just tons of really deep drains. And the whole biking situation just feels really tight on that road.
That's helpful. Thanks.
Okay, Jessica.
Oh,
Sorry, I was about to pull up my own map. But I was just wondering if we could look at a map of the east to west connections and kind of what that would look like and how these changes or possible changes would help that, because we're kind of still missing.
In general, east to west bike connections, you mean?
Yeah. So are we thinking more like Mount? I know a couple of years ago when we were looking at this list, looked like the Mount connection would really help. But then there's also the Greenway project. Is it Kent and Central?
Kent Central Greenway project. Yeah, but that is, I mean, again, that's currently unfunded to get across the main streets.
Right.
So this is the bike map, and I don't know if anyone saw me click that link, but tiny.cc/Missoula bike map with Missoula bike and map capitalized will bring you to this map. And so as you can see, yeah, we have the Kent Central Greenway identified, but it currently has major barriers especially at Brooks. Russell is okay, actually. There's a crossing with a center median right behind the Ace Trempers there. That's pretty nice. And because of the signal at north and the signal at south, you can find gaps in traffic really easily. But then, yeah, there's the new connection across the trail, which is great. But then at Reserve, you have the signal about a half a block away near Porter. But the plan, when this greenway is complete, that signal will be moved to Central and will be more directly user activated instead of having to wait for it to sync with everything else happening on Reserve. So that's there. South Avenue has bike lanes, but they currently end at Reserve. Now, if you remember, the full reconstruction of South Avenue, that design is slowly moving forward. We're nearing 60%, and that includes bike lanes and a little bit better access through the intersection here, but it's not, there isn't a ton of east-west connectivity. So that Mount connection, I mean, it's in yellow here, which means it's an existing bike route. It just doesn't have a dedicated lane, that meets any sort of criteria on it. And so getting that established would really help east-west connectivity. And a couple years ago, we did get 3 blocks of bike lane right here from Reserve to Eaton, because that was the only section that was chip sealed. And so we did it there. And so the idea is that we were going to keep it going for the rest of for the street.
Yeah, that would be good.
All right. Thanks, Jessica. James?
Yes, I also would like to make a comment on the Mount Avenue possible addition of bike lanes. And that would be about the double left-hand turn center lane. When we were looking at Mount Avenue a couple years ago and the possibility of adding bike lanes in there, I paid attention to, on snowy days, I paid attention making several trips back and forth down that road in a motor vehicle. Noticed how little utilized that double left-hand turn lane was by motor vehicles, just by noticing that throughout the whole day, hardly anybody would drive down it. And you could tell because there were no ruts or tire tracks running down the middle of the road. So in terms of getting the most out of our infrastructure for that road, it seems like motorists are not really utilizing that double left-hand turn lane that often. So its elimination doesn't seem like it would be that catastrophic. It's just an observation I made of that street.
Thanks, James.
That's all.
Gene?
Yeah, I'll stay with the Mount Avenue thing for a bit. I have to admit, I use Mount Avenue a lot. If I head out to Big Flat Road to do rides, it's the nicest way out from where I live. I have to admit, I like it the way it is. Along the curb where bike lane would go, it's usually a real mess. So you need a lot of improvement to the pavement and the storm drains and everything. I see cyclists along there now that are hugging the curb, and cars are passing them with maybe 2 feet of clearance. And I know they're kind of shaking in their boots. And I've seen people with kids in bike trailers over on the right side, and I just kind of want to just pull over and tell them, you're inviting people to just buzz by you because you're hiding yourself over in the gutter. So again, I become my own traffic calming by using the road with the turn lanes or whatever. I've virtually never held up a car for more than 15 seconds tops anywhere along there, including west of Russell. Obviously, if you're putting bike lanes in most of these areas, you have to eliminate in some places, I think, east of Brooks, you have to take away street parking on one side, so that's an issue. I think we need to really take a deep, long look at this instead of just kind of rubber stamping things. So I'll just leave that out there for now. The other two things I want to get in quick, I'm running out of battery. When we look at bike lanes and protected bike lanes in the future, I think we need to, and maybe Ben, you've been doing this, take into account what I think will be a continuing explosion in electric assist bikes. So we're going to have a lot more cyclists traveling at 17 to 20 miles an hour than we do now. So we're going to have to deal with issues in the bike lanes, especially if they're protected, with more bikes that are going to tend to be passing slower bikes. So I think that's something we need to kind of keep in the back of our minds, perhaps for a while, in terms of when we establish bike lanes. Do we need to have wider lanes, and what does that do? How do we deal with essentially motorized bicycles that are passing human-powered bicycles? How do we work with all that? So that's something else to keep in mind. And finally, the last thing, going back to the bike lanes where we have a hilly street, maybe we can start working on a kind of an overview or what do you call it, baseline position as to, if we have uphill stretches, that we're going to have a bike lane uphill and sharrows downhill for these streets when it comes to making best use of the street width that we have. So that's I know it's kind of a mixed bag I threw out there, but that's just kind of my thoughts on I've been hearing talked about over the last 15 minutes. I'll let it go at that.
Thanks, Gene. All good points. The uphill bike lane, downhill sharrow is, I personally like to think of that as a useful arrow in the quiver when right of way or is narrow. Here on High Park Way, we have 34 feet curb to curb, which is wide enough to easily get bike lanes in each direction. Good size ones. You could get 11-foot travel lanes, which we prefer around bends, especially when they're transit routes, which this is, and over 6-foot bike lanes. If we compare that to a street like 23rd, just slightly west on the hill, let's see here. So here, we only have 24, I think it's 28 feet curb to curb instead of 34, 35. And so here, we really don't have the room to do bike lanes in both directions. So here we would, we could put a bike lane in the uphill and then have a sharrow in the downhill really easily. But we wouldn't be able to put a bike lane in both directions. So it's nice to have that tool available, but I don't know if that would be our preferred way to do bike facilities on hills. I certainly want to hear thoughts from the board as we think about that. This one hasn't been chip sealed in ages, and basically the reason is Brian has been waiting to see this sidewalk project continue down the hill before, and then he wants to tie it all together. But we don't know when that's going to happen.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions or comments for Ben right now? Okay, there are none. Let me get back to
Jessica just raised her hand.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jessica.
Oops. Yeah, I would guess I would just say, as far as taking the lane or sharrows, I mean, I think there are a lot of people who are never going to feel comfortable actually riding in the lane of traffic. And so I think, like, I consider myself a fairly confident bike rider, but there are streets where I don't like to do that. And I think Mount is one of them, where it just feels like people want to move through there faster than I want to be going. So I think I like point taken, Gene, as far as that being the safer place to be, but I just think it doesn't always feel safe to people. And so when we're thinking about creating these connections from one side of town to the other, if it's going to be the main way to get through, I think we should consider having bike lanes there, and maybe also in the case of the uphill downhill where possible.
All right, thanks, Jessica. Jesse?
Yeah, I just want to support what she said. I feel exactly the same way. I feel like if there's room, we should always opt for the bike lanes. And it's only in the case where the right of way is compressed or there's other issues that we should do the sharrows, because I feel as she does, like I want to be in a bike lane. And I particularly felt that way when my son was on the tag along and was 4 years old. And things like that. I just feel like if we're trying to design for all users, we should try to design in a way that makes them comfortable. And then also I have just like a couple of announcements when we get to that point.
Okay, Jesse, I really want to ask you, I know that we're approaching 5. I really want to ask, do you feel that same way when you're on a 10% grade like 23rd Street and you're holding your brakes to maintain 22 miles an hour instead of, like where you're really not holding vehicles back? Do you still feel like you just want to be off to the side and not in their way at all?
Absolutely. And I was definitely like 12 years ago, one of the people who moved here, having not ridden bikes very much, who rode on the sidewalk and was terrified. And I have had like a complete sort of blossoming in my biking in Missoula, which just shows you that if you have good infrastructure, people who are not very confident on a bike can become really avid, enthusiastic cyclists. But I still think that having the protected or the separation, even if it's like a psychological separation, is good for people like across the board.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Jesse. But there are no other questions or comments on the public projects wish list for Ben. We'll move on to announcements.
Real quick, Corey, I just want to say that I will send this out in spreadsheet form, and I encourage everybody to look at, refamiliarize yourselves with Complete Streets Policy and Admin Rule 415. Look on a map, and if you can, get out there and bike and drive these sections and think about connections. And I look forward to more in-depth discussion at the February meeting. I'll have more information about those locations, about what staff's current direction is on some of these, and maybe that can help with that discussion. But yeah, I look forward to kind of the official recommendations from the board on this.
Okay. Yeah, definitely do that if you guys get an opportunity. Use Ben's spreadsheet. If you don't know what Admin Rule 415 is or aren't familiar with Complete Streets Policy, I'm sure either Ben or I or somebody can get you connected up with that. All right. So I'll go ahead and move on to announcements. And Jess, you said you had an announcement?
Yeah, I just want to, because we have new board members, Kip's here, and I don't think our other new board members here today. But anyway, I just wanted to say that Jessica Doherty Goodburn wrote a grant and got it. And it's going to make the area by Bernice's Bakery have a little parklet and have all this awesome stuff. And I feel like she's been super quiet and humble, but I just think it's awesome. And yay. I just wanted to say that. And then the second thing is, I really like the neighborhood traffic management plan. I think it's great. And it seems like there's like a really nice approach, and I feel great about it. So nice job, Ben.
Thank you.
Yeah, great job, Jessica. All right, there are no other announcements. I will go ahead and the next meeting will be on February 2nd at 3 o'clock, typically at City Council chambers, but will once again be held here on Zoom. With that, I will do the meeting is adjourned at 5:03 p.m. Thanks, folks. Have a good week.
Thank you. See ya.